At one point, the subject of today's video was actually homeless. After becoming a 4-star recruit in high school, schools like Ohio State and Oklahoma pulled his offer and said that they didn't want him coming there. Instead, he'd bounce around from a lower level school to JUCO, and then he had to live out of his car. Eventually, a school in the Pac-12 gave him a chance, and while he was there, he became one of the most decorated and best running backs in school history. Unfortunately though, after declaring for the 2023 NFL Draft, he found himself in some trouble off the field, and right now, this is the main reason why he may not be on an NFL roster this fall. In today's video, we're going to examine another big-time player who went undrafted. We're going to be talking about Utah running back Tavion Thomas, and we're going to go through his story, his whirlwind career, and why he ended up going undrafted. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new to the channel and love college football content, turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now, let's get started and talk about what happened to Tavion Thomas. So going back in time, he grew up in a football family, as his cousin was actually Joseph Skates, who at one time was a Michigan State commit and was most recently a wide receiver at Iowa State. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, Thomas was a huge Ohio State fan growing up. He said, quote, "I used to love watching Ohio State. I definitely grew up watching them. Braxton Miller and all those guys like Zeke, I was a fan of, and it was pretty cool to watch." Thomas would eventually blow up at Wayne High School, and in February of 2017, Ohio State gave him an offer. Alabama had offered him just a couple of days earlier, and Georgia, Michigan, USC, and Texas all wanted him as well. From an outsider's perspective, it looked pretty obvious where Thomas was going to go. One scout said, quote, "Just being an Ohio kid, you dream of Ohio State." Their running style, Urban Meyer was running a power spread, and they were going to feed him the ball. He really enjoyed hearing that, and if anything, the relationship he formed with Tony Alford was strong. But, as I said in the intro, Ohio State would pass on him. They did not give him a committable offer, as they first said he would need to go the JUCO route. In recruiting, that's not super unprecedented, but it's also not the norm. Apparently, the coaches had a mix of academic and maturity concerns. Tavion believed he'd have to spend 2 years at JUCO, and he wasn't really feeling it. He said, quote, "I wasn't feeling it. It's a love-hate relationship now. This is something I want to show that they missed out on me." So no, he would not end up being a Buckeye, but he would still have plenty of other suitors. As a junior, Thomas would rush for 1,606 yards and scored 17 touchdowns. He was named an All-Ohio first-team selection and was the Southwest Ohio Public League Offensive Player of the Year. He then decided to commit to Oklahoma. He was going to be the next great Sooner running back, but that one wouldn't happen either. Oklahoma had concerns about his academics and maturity, so they asked him to go the JUCO route as well, which once again, he declined. He decided to decommit from Oklahoma and listed a final 2 of Cincinnati and Tennessee. Eventually, he chose the Bearcats over 33 other offers, and Coach Fickle was going to give him a chance. Marcus Freeman also really wanted him on the roster, and they had no concerns about him. Thomas would end up committing to the Bearcats, made the grades, and would get a chance to avoid JUCO altogether. He's one of the top backs in the Midwest according to 24/7 Sports, as Thomas was listed as a 3-star recruit, the number 18 running back, and the 410th best player in the class of 2018. So, how would Tavion end up doing at Cincinnati? When Tavion arrived at Cincinnati, he'd have a considerable amount of height. He was obviously a local big-time prospect, but he would not have the kind of career that many expected him to have in a Bearcats uniform. As a freshman in 2018, Thomas would carry the ball 89 times for 499 yards and 6 touchdowns. His best game of the year would come against Alabama A&M, in which he had 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had touchdowns against UConn, Tulane, UCF, and East Carolina. He'd get a chance to play a little bit in their bowl game where he would fumble the ball. Going into the 2019 season, Cincinnati would end up breaking out, but after just 4 games, his Bearcats career was over. He ran for 190 yards and a touchdown in those first 4 games before it was announced that he'd be a redshirt candidate. He decided to enter the transfer portal just 2 weeks later and left Cincinnati with 698 yards and 7 touchdowns and 14 total games played. Because of that, Thomas would now have to figure things out, as he then decided to go over to Independence Community College. While he was there, he'd play in 5 games during 2020 and ended up finishing with 347 yards on 50 carries. It was a really tough time for him, and I guess those coaches all knew something that he didn't, as he would end up at JUCO, and he said, quote, "The crazy thing about it is once I went to JUCO, I started appreciating everything. My mental game got stronger, and I learned a lot. it probably would have been better to go to a JUCO the first time right out of high school. So yeah, he admitted what all these coaches were telling him in high school, but now he just needed a chance. Except things would get a lot more difficult before they'd get better for him. In October of 2021, he said, quote, "It's crazy that a few months ago I was sleeping in my car, watching college football on my cell phone, wishing I could get another shot to play the game. I had some people that were helping me and were giving me money for food, and they told me to keep positive thoughts and fight through adversity. It was definitely heavy on my mind, and it was hard, but I did know my why." He ended up wondering if he'd ever play football again, but apparently it increased his faith in God, which is obviously a good thing, and he provided an opportunity for him. Eventually, Tavion to former Utah star running back Zach Moss, and while the Utah coaches loved his film, they didn't have room for another running back at the time. So yeah, obviously he ended up getting an offer to play at Utah, and he gladly accepted it. Except things did not go smoothly for Thomas at first. So Thomas would end up earning a pretty big role early on, as against Weber State, he'd have over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in their first game. After that, he'd sort of disappear, but then would re-emerge against USC in early October, going for over 100 yards in that win. After that, he helped them beat number 18 Arizona State, had 2 touchdowns on the road against Oregon State, and then had an insane 3-game stretch. He had 4 touchdowns against UCLA, 4 more touchdowns against Stanford, and 3 more touchdowns and an upset victory over number 3 Oregon. That was an insane stretch for him, and then he also had 142 yards against Colorado in the season finale, and had 2 touchdowns in their Pac-12 championship win over Oregon. Because of that, Utah would end up going to the Rose Bowl, and in that game, he had 67 yards and a score. In his breakout 2021 season, he finished with 1,108 yards and 21 touchdowns. He decided to skip the NFL draft and come back for one more year, and ultimately, it looks like this could have been a mistake. In their road game against Florida in Week 1, he went for over 100 yards, and then had 2 touchdowns against Southern Utah and 1 against San Diego State, but from there, he cooled off. He had a decent game against number 18 UCLA before his one huge performance against Stanford. In that game, he went for a career-high 180 yards and 2 touchdowns in that one, but overall, it was a disappointing 2022 season. He finished with 687 yards and 7 touchdowns, and decided to declare for the 2023 NFL Draft, and said he had a toe injury as well. On January 19th, according to NFL Mock Draft Database, Thomas was considered a 3rd or 4th round pick. At one time, he was ranked as high as the 140th best prospect, but as this offseason has continued, his stock has only gone lower and lower. That is because there was some trouble off the field. In early April, he was arrested for 2 incidents of domestic violence with his alleged girlfriend at the time. Kyle Whittingham said, quote, "I don't know a lot of the details. My focus is on this football team here and now and the players that are in the program. That's my take on it." So it seems that the public has now found out about this, and I don't want to trash talk his name or gossip about him, but let's just say there is a legal case going on with him right now, and I'm not going to assume anything, and if you'd like to look up the details for yourself, you can type it in Google. Either way, that is why Thomas would end up not hearing his name called in this year's draft, and he might have bigger fish to fry than playing football on Sunday. Either way, we all need to be hoping for the best, and it is unfortunate to see this happen. Thomas has an incredible story of going from homeless to one of the best running backs in the country, but his story is not over yet, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But what do you guys think? If you're a Utah fan, what do you think of Tavion Thomas? Who's a player I should cover in my next video? And who's another player whose stock fell in the 2023 draft? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.